Amara's hands trembled as she balanced the tray of expensive wine bottles, her worn black shoes silent against the marble floor of Celestia, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. She'd worked here for 3 months, and she still wasn't used to the weight of silence that fell when certain men entered the private dining room. Tonight, that silence was heavier than usual. The table of 8 men in tailored suits radiated danger, like heat from asphalt in July. Their leader sat at the head, a man whose presence made her pulse quicken for reasons she refused to examine. Dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, eyes the color of smoke that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched. Edward Morelli. She'd heard the whispered name, seen the way the restaurant owner practically genuflected when he arrived. Amara told herself to stay invisible, to pour the wine and disappear. But she'd learned long ago that invisibility was a luxury women like her couldn't always afford. And tonight, when Edward Morelli spoke in rapid, fluent Arabic to test his capos, never expecting a response, Amara's past collided with her present in a single unthinking moment. She answered him in perfect Arabic, and the entire room went silent. What happened when Amara revealed she understood every word? How did this single moment unravel the careful life she'd built? And why did the most dangerous man in New York suddenly look at her like she held all his secrets? Her story begins not with fear, but with the weight of languages buried deep, and the realization that some men don't just notice you, they see everything you've tried to hide. Amara had learned to make herself small. At 26, she'd perfected the art of being present but unremarkable, of moving through spaces without leaving an impression. It was a survival skill she'd honed since leaving her old life behind 3 years ago. Tonight, she wore her uniform like armor, black button-down shirt, black slacks, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun that had taken 20 minutes to perfect. The small gold hoops in her ears were the only jewelry she allowed herself. Simple, professional, forgettable. Celestia Restaurant occupied the top floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, where the city sprawled beneath them like scattered diamonds. She'd gotten the job through sheer persistence, showing up every day for a week, until the manager finally relented. The tips here could cover 2 weeks of rent in her small studio in Queens. She couldn't afford to lose this. Table 7 needs their wine, Marcus. The head waiter hissed at her. Don't mess this up, Amara. Those men. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. She'd seen them arrive. 8 men in suits that probably cost more than her annual salary, moving with the coordinated grace of predators. The restaurant had cleared the entire private section, and the owner himself had greeted them at the door. Amara lifted the tray with 3 bottles of wine that probably cost $1,000 each and moved toward the private dining room. Her reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling windows. A slender black woman with warm brown skin that glowed under the restaurant's soft lighting. Dark eyes that had learned to reveal nothing, and hands that never quite stopped shaking when she was nervous. The room fell silent when she entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked her movement. 7 men sat around an oval table, but her attention fixed on the one at the head, Edward Morelli. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life. She'd overheard enough whispered conversations to know he ran half the underground operations in New York. At 32, he'd built an empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an ability to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He was devastating. That was the only word for it. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and eyes that seemed to strip away every defense she'd ever built. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, and she could see the edge of a tattoo creeping up his neck from beneath his white collar. "The bow," she said quietly, her voice steady through pure force of will. She began pouring, starting with the carpo on Edward's right. The man had cold eyes and a cruel mouth, and when her hand came near his glass, he deliberately moved it, forcing her to lean closer. She felt Edward's gaze on her, but refused to look up. "Careful, sweetheart," the cruel-mouthed capo said in English with a thick Italian accent. "We don't want you spilling on expensive suits." Of course, sir, Amara murmured, completing the pour and moving to the next guest. She could feel the weight of their assessment, the way powerful men looked at women they considered beneath them. It made her skin crawl, but she'd endured worse. She'd survived this, too. When she reached Edward, she found his eyes already on her, not assessing like the others, studying like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. She poured his wine with hands that steadied through sheer determination. When she finished, she stepped back, ready to disappear. That's when he spoke. Do you think she understands what we're saying? His Arabic was flawless, the accent placing him as someone who'd spent significant time in the Middle East. The table erupted in laughter. They thought they were invisible, speaking in a language no one here would understand. Amara's blood ran cold. She should walk away, should pretend she heard nothing. But the cruel-mouthed capo answered in Arabic, his eyes raking over her with an expression that made her stomach turn. Of course not. She's just an American waitress. Maybe we can play with her a little. The words hit her like a slap. In the 3 years since she'd fled, she'd let people underestimate her, had hidden every part of herself that might draw attention. But there were lines she wouldn't let anyone cross, no matter the cost. Her mouth opened before her brain caught up. Anna afam kulkima. I understand every word. Her Arabic emerged clear and cultured, the accent from years of study and life abroad unmistakable. The silence was absolute. Every man at the table froze. The cruel-mouthed Capos' smirk vanished. But Amara's eyes were locked on Edward Morelli, watching shock ripple across features that probably rarely revealed anything. His eyes widened fractionally, then narrowed. She saw his mind working, reassessing everything about her in a single moment. The intelligence in those gray eyes was almost frightening. And where did you learn Arabic? His voice had changed, become softer, but somehow more dangerous. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd revealed too much, but she couldn't take it back now. Beirut. I lived in the Middle East for several years, Jordan and Beirut. One of the KPOS started to speak, but Edward raised a single finger, silencing him without a word. His attention never left Amara's face. Ma Kuntalina Hunak, what were you doing there? This was dangerous territory. The truth was complicated, tied to a life she'd worked hard to leave behind. But something in his eyes told her lies wouldn't work. He'd spot them in an instant. Limuda. I was working as a translator for the United Nations. She saw it land the implication that she wasn't just fluent, but professionally trained, that she'd held a position requiring security clearance and specialized skills. That everything about her carefully constructed persona as just a waitress was a lie. Edward leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that unnerving intensity. Then, to her shock, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. What's your name? He asked in English now, his voice carrying a hint of something she couldn't quite identify. Curiosity. Respect. Amara. She forced the word past suddenly dry lips. Amara Sanchez. Amara, he repeated like he was tasting it. Sit down. She blinked. Sir, I'm working. Not anymore. He gestured to an empty chair. Tonight you're my guest, Mr. Morelli. I can't. Edward. His eyes held hers. And you can, Marcus, he called, not loudly, but the head waiter appeared instantly. Amara will be joining us for dinner. Have someone cover her tables. Yes, Mr. Morelli. Right away. Marcus shot her a look she couldn't decipher before hurrying away. Amara stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to protect the small, safe life she'd built. But Edward Morelli wasn't asking, and men like him didn't accept refusal. She started. Please. The single word, softened by something almost gentle in his expression, cut through her resistance. She sat. The meal that followed felt surreal. The capo spoke in Italian now, occasionally throwing suspicious glances her way, but Edward kept returning to Arabic, asking her questions about Jordan, about Beirut, about her work. She answered carefully, revealing enough to satisfy his curiosity, but not enough to expose the full truth of why she'd fled. She didn't mention the threats, the corruption she'd witnessed, The documents she'd translated that had made her a target, the fact that Amara Sanchez was a name she'd adopted when Amara Ahmed had become too dangerous to keep. But she suspected, watching the intelligence in his gray eyes, that Edward heard everything she wasn't saying. "Why here?" he asked finally, gesturing to the restaurant around them. "Why serve wine when you could be translating for diplomats?" Amara's fingers tightened on her water glass. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the one pretending to be on your side. Something flickered in his expression. Understanding. You ran from something. It wasn't a question. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. And you thought hiding here would keep you safe? His voice had dropped lower, and suddenly she felt the full weight of his attention on her. Not threatening, protective. It terrified her more than anger would have. "It's worked for 3 years," she said quietly. "Until tonight." Until tonight, she agreed. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. In it, Amara felt something shift. She'd spent 3 years invisible, and in a single conversation, Edward Morelli had seen her more clearly than anyone since she'd fled. The question was, what would he do with that knowledge? Amara had broken her own rule. Never draw attention. Never reveal yourself. Never let anyone see who you really are. But Edward Morelli wasn't just anyone. And the way he looked at her now, like she was both mystery and answer, made her realize that invisibility might no longer be an option. What happens when the most dangerous man in New York decides you're worth protecting, even if you never asked for his help? Amar's apartment in Queens felt smaller than ever when she unlocked the door at 2 a.m. Her hands shook as she set down her purse, the weight of the evening finally crashing down on her. She'd stayed until the meal ended, endured Edward, intense scrutiny, and the Capos' suspicious glances, and somehow maintained her composure. But now, alone in her studio with its second-hand furniture and water-stained ceiling, she could admit the truth. She'd made a terrible mistake. She changed into sweats and a t-shirt, then sat on her bed, staring at the window that overlooked a narrow alley. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You left without your tips." Jay, Amara's heart stuttered. How did he get her number? "I'll collect them tomorrow," she typed back after a long moment. Tomorrow is Sunday. Celestia is closed. She'd forgotten. Her mind felt sluggish with exhaustion and fear. Monday, then 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I want to see you tomorrow. Lunch. I'll send a car at noon." Amara stared at the message. This was how it started, wasn't it? Men like Edward didn't ask. They commanded. She thought of the cruel-mouthed Capos' words, of the way power corrupted, of all the reasons she'd left her old life behind. "I'm busy tomorrow," she lied. "No, you're not. You work Tuesday through Saturday." "I know your schedule, Amara." A chill ran down her spine. How much did he know? Had he been watching her before tonight? "This is inappropriate," she typed. "What's inappropriate is what my capo said about you in Arabic. What's inappropriate is you walking home alone at 2 a.m. through neighborhoods. I wouldn't let my men enter unarmed. What's inappropriate is you working yourself to exhaustion when you're clearly meant for better things." Amara's fingers hovered over the keys. She should tell him no. Should block the number. Should quit Celestia and find work somewhere he'd never find her. Instead, she typed, "Why do you care?" The response came quickly. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Noon tomorrow. Don't make me come get you." She didn't respond, but she also didn't sleep. The car arrived at 11:55 a.m. Amara watched from her window as a gleaming black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to her building. A man in a suit stepped out, not Edward, but clearly one of his men, professional, alert, armed. She'd bet money on it. She'd dressed carefully. Jeans and a rust-colored sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown skin, her hair in loose curls around her shoulders, minimal makeup, not trying too hard, but not looking like she'd given up either. The driver held the door open without speaking. The interior was leather and luxury, so far removed from her normal life, it felt like entering another dimension. They drove in silence through Queens across the bridge into Manhattan, but instead of heading to a restaurant, They went north toward the Upper East Side. Amara's unease grew. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Mr. Morelli's residence," the driver said, his tone neutral. "I thought we were having lunch." "You are?" "He's cooking." Amara blinked. Edward Morelli, crime boss, dangerous man, ruler of half of New York's underworld, was cooking lunch. The building they stopped at was elegant and discreet, the kind of place where you needed more money than most people made in a lifetime just to get past the doorman. They rode an elevator to the penthouse, and when the doors opened, Amara stepped into a space that stole her breath. Floor-toiling windows overlooked Central Park. Modern furniture in grays and blacks, art on the walls that looked original and expensive. But what struck her most was how quiet it was. Not just absence of noise, but a profound stillness, like the apartment existed outside the normal chaos of the city. "You came," Edward said, appearing from what must be the kitchen. He wore dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt that showed the full extent of his tattoo, intricate Arabic calligraphy running up his neck and disappearing under his collar. In casual clothes, he should have seemed less dangerous. Somehow, he seemed more. "You didn't really give me a choice," Amara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's always a choice." He moved closer, and she caught his scent. Expensive cologne with hints of cedar and something darker. "But I'm glad you chose this." "Why am I here, Edward?" He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes seeming to see too much. "Because last night you revealed something about yourself, and I have questions because I can't stop thinking about you, and because I think you're in danger, and I want to help." "I don't need your help." "Everyone needs help sometimes, Amara." He gestured toward the living room. "Come, the food's almost ready." Against her better judgment, she followed. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, but clearly used. There were spices lined up on the counter, a well-worn cutting board, pans that showed age and care. Edward moved around the space with surprising comfort, finishing what looked like a Mediterranean spread. Hummus, tabule, grilled chicken with za'atar, warm pita bread. "You cook," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "My mother insisted all her children learn." He plated the food with practiced ease. She said, "A man who can't feed himself is a man who can't survive." Smart woman. She was past tense. Something flickered in his expression, pain quickly masked. "She died when I was 15. This was her favorite meal to make when we had guests." Amara felt something soften in her chest. It was easy to see Edward Morelli as just a dangerous criminal. Harder to see him as a boy who'd lost his mother young, who'd learned to cook her recipes to keep her memory alive. They ate in the living room, the city sprawling beneath them. The food was excellent, and Amara found herself relaxing, despite her better judgment. Edward asked about her life in Jordan, about the places she'd seen, the people she'd met. She found herself talking more than she'd intended, sharing carefully edited memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "What made you leave?" he asked finally, the question she'd been dreading. Amara set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. "I saw something I shouldn't have. People I worked with, people I trusted were involved in things that made me a liability. When I tried to report it, they made it clear what would happen if I didn't disappear." "Who?" Edward's voice had gone cold. "It doesn't matter. I left, changed my name, started over."
"It matters to me."
He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "Amara, the moment you spoke Arabic last night, you put yourself at risk again. My capos talk. Word spreads. If someone's looking for a woman with your skills, it won't take long to find you." Fear clutched at her throat. She'd known this, had spent all night thinking about it. But hearing him say it made it real. "I'll quit, Celestia. Move again. I've done it before. Running isn't a solution. It's a delay." Edward's hand covered hers on the table, and she startled at the warmth of his touch. "Let me protect you."
"Why?"
she whispered.
"You don't even know me."
"I know enough." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "I know you're brave enough to speak truth to power. I know you're smart enough to survive 3 years on your own. I know you hide yourself behind serving trays and uniforms, but last night I saw who you really are." And I think he paused, seeming to search for words. I think you're worth protecting. Amara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. No one had offered to protect her in so long. She'd learned to be her own fortress, her own defender. But God, she was tired, so tired of being alone. I don't want to owe you, she said softly. Then don't. Think of it as mutual benefit. You help me sometimes with translations, legitimate ones, nothing illegal. I make sure no one comes looking for you. We help each other. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The way he looked at her wasn't about translations or mutual benefit. It was about something far more complicated, far more dangerous than any enemy from her past. But Amara found herself nodding. Anyway, okay, Edward repeated, and his smile, rare and devastating, made her breath catch. She didn't know if she'd just made the smartest decision of her life or sealed her fate. But as she sat in Edward Morelli's penthouse, his hand warm on hers and the city glittering below, Amara realized she was tired of running. Maybe it was time to let someone else stand beside her for once. Protection comes with a price. But Amara was beginning to realize that Edward Morelli wasn't asking for payment, at least not the kind she expected. He saw her, truly saw her. And that was more dangerous than any enemy. Because when you let someone past your defenses, when you stop hiding who you really are, there's no going back. Oh, and Amara was about to learn that Edward's protection came with an intensity that would reshape her entire world. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur that felt like living between two different lives. By day, Amara worked her shifts at Celestia, serving wealthy patrons and carefully avoiding the private dining room. By night, and on her days off, she found herself pulled into Edward Morelli's orbit in ways she couldn't quite resist. He was true to his word about protection. Two men, silent, professional, always at a discreet distance, began following her. At first it unnerved her, but she quickly learned they were competent and surprisingly respectful. They never intruded, never made her feel watched in a predatory way. They were simply there. Edward called her every evening at 9 o'clock, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for a few minutes. They talked about everything. Her childhood in Houston, his in Brooklyn, her love of languages, his of chess, her dreams of someday returning to translation work, his complicated feelings about the family business he'd inherited. "Do you ever wish you'd chosen differently?" she asked one night, curled up on her couch with the phone pressed to her ear. Every day, his voice was quiet. "But my father built this empire, and when he died, I had two choices: take over or watch it tear itself apart. My siblings, my cousins, the families that depend on us. They needed someone strong, someone willing to do what was necessary. That's a lot of weight to carry." It is a pause. "You understand that, don't you? Carrying weight you never asked for." Amara thought of the documents she'd translated, the corruption she'd uncovered, the way her whole life had imploded because she tried to do the right thing. "Yeah, I understand." On her third Sunday off, Edward invited her to his penthouse again. This time, he wanted to teach her to play chess. Amara sat across from him at an antique board, trying to focus on the game while hyper-aware of his presence. The way he smelled like expensive cologne and danger, the way his long fingers moved pieces with casual confidence. "You're distracted," he observed, capturing her night. "You're intimidating." His eyes lifted to hers, and she saw amusement there. "I intimidate you. You're Edward Morelli. You intimidate everyone."
Not you.
He leaned back in his chair. "You've never been afraid of me." "I didn't say I wasn't afraid. I said you intimidated me. There's a difference." "What are you afraid of then?" His voice had gone softer, more intimate. "You, Amara, wanted to say the way you make me feel. The way I'm starting to need these conversations. The way I look forward to seeing you more than I should." Instead, she moved her queen and said, "Losing at chess, at everything." Edward studied her for a long moment, then reached across the board and took her hand. His palm was warm, callous despite his wealth. "I won't let you lose, Amara. You can't promise that. Watch me." 3 days later, the careful balance of her two worlds shattered. Amara was walking home from her shift, her guards trailing at their usual distance, when a car pulled up beside her. Not Edward's, a sleek Mercedes with diplomatic plates. The back window rolled down, and Amara's blood turned to ice. The face that appeared belonged to Karim Novak, cultural attaché to the Russian consulate, and the man who'd threatened her 3 years ago when she'd translated documents proving his involvement in illegal arms sales. Amara Ahmed, he said in Russian, his accent heavy and menacing. What a surprise finding you here. She didn't run, didn't freeze. Years of diplomatic training kicked in, and she met his gaze calmly, even as terror flooded her veins. So, you have me confused with someone else.
Doi.
His smile was cruel. Strange. You look exactly like the translator who cost me a very lucrative position. The one who disappeared before I could express my gratitude. Amara's guards had noticed the exchange. She saw them moving closer, hands going to concealed weapons, but Mail noticed, too. Interesting friends you've made, he observed. I wonder what they'd think if they knew who you really are. Drive away, Amara said quietly in Russian. Now, while you still can, or what? Your bodyguards will shoot a diplomat in the middle of Queens. He laughed. I think not. But I will see you again, Amara.
Soon.
The window rolled up. The Mercedes drove away. Amara stood frozen on the sidewalk, her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. One of her guards appeared at her elbow. Miss Sanchez, we need to get you somewhere safe. Mr. Morelli needs to know about this. No, she started, but her phone was already ringing. Edward, she answered with shaking hands.
Amara.
His voice was tight with controlled fury. My men just reported what happened. Are you hurt? I am fine. You're not fine. Don't lie to me. A pause, then softer. Come to the penthouse now. We need to talk about who you really are. The drive felt endless. When she finally stood in Edward, living room again, he was pacing like a caged predator, his phone in one hand, as he barked orders at someone in rapid Italian. When he saw her, he ended the call and crossed to her in 3 strides. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones as he searched her eyes. Tell me everything. No more half-truths. Everything. So she did. Standing in his living room with Manhattan glittering below them, Amara told him about Amara Rashid, about the UN position she'd earned through years of study, about the documents she'd translated that proved multiple diplomats, including Karim Volkov, were involved in arms trafficking. She told him about reporting it, about the threats, about the car accident that killed her supervisor and was ruled mechanical failure, but that she knew was murder. She told him about running, about becoming Amara Sanchez, about 3 years of looking over her shoulder and wondering if today would be the day they found her. When she finished, Edward was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. She stiffened in surprise before melting against him, breathing in his scent, letting herself be held for the first time in years. Why didn't you tell me all this before? He asked against her hair. Because my truth puts everyone around me in danger. I learned that the hard way. Edward pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Amara, I run one of the largest organized crime families on the East Coast. Danger is my business, and compared to corrupt diplomats who hide behind immunity. His smile was cold and sharp. Those men are amateurs. What are you saying? I'm saying Karim Novak just made a serious mistake. He threatened someone under my protection. Edward, thumb traced her lower lip, and Amara's breath caught. He's going to learn what happens when you come after what's mine. I'm not yours, she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. Aren't you? His gray eyes held hers intense and unwavering. Tell me you don't feel this between us. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you. Tell me your heart doesn't race when I touch you. Amara's heart was racing now, thundering so hard, she was certain he could hear it. Edward, I've spent 2 weeks trying to be patient, trying to give you space, but I'm done pretending this is just about protection. His forehead touched hers. I want you, Amara, not as a job, not as an obligation. I want you in my life, in my home, in my bed, and I want to keep you safe while you decide if you want the same thing. She should say no, should protect her heart the way she'd learned to protect her body, her identity, her life. But standing in Edward Morelli's arms with his confession hanging between them, Amara realized she was tired of protecting herself from everything, including the possibility of being happy. I want that too, she whispered. God help me. I want that too. Edward's kiss was inevitable, like gravity, like the tide. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath. One hand tangling in her curls, while the other pressed against her lower back, pulling her closer. Amara kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness, 3 years of fear, 3 years of denial, all pouring out in that single moment of surrender. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Edward rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight. Here, let me keep you safe. Amara nodded, unable to form words. That night, she slept in Edward Morelli's guest room, knowing he was just down the hall. She slept better than she had in 3 years, and she knew there was no going back. When you've spent years hiding, being truly seen feels like standing naked in sunlight. Edward knew all her secrets now, and instead of turning away, he'd pulled her closer. But Kareem Novak's reappearance meant the past Amara fled was catching up fast. And as she fell deeper into Edward's world and into feelings she'd sworn she'd never risk again, Amara would have to decide, keep running from her old life, or stand and fight with the most dangerous man in New York at her side. Amara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory flooded back. Kareem Novak, her confession. Edward's kiss. She sat up wearing the t-shirt Edward had lent her, her curls wild around her shoulders. The apartment was quiet, but she heard movement from the kitchen. Edward stood at the stove making breakfast. He'd changed into workout clothes, and Amara could see the full extent of his tattoos now. Arabic calligraphy running down both arms, intricate and beautiful. When he noticed her, his face softened into something that made her chest ache. Morning, he said. Coffee, please. She padded into the kitchen, accepting the mug he offered. You didn't have to let me sleep in. You needed it. He plated eggs and toast, setting it in front of her. We need to talk about next steps. I should leave New York, Amara said quietly. Start over somewhere else. Away from you, so I don't put you at risk.
No.
Edward, voice was flat. Final. You're not running again. We're handling this. Edward, you don't understand who these people are. I understand perfectly. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Kareem Novak is a mid-level operative using diplomatic immunity as cover for arms trafficking. He's dangerous, but he's also predictable. Men like him rely on fear and secrecy. We're going to take both away from him. Amara stared at him.
How?
By bringing everything into the light. Edward pulled out his phone, showing her a file. I had my people dig last night. Volkov's been sloppy. He's got financial records that don't match his official salary. Communications with known weapons dealers. Meetings he didn't log with the consulate. We're going to compile everything and send it to every news outlet and law enforcement agency that will listen. He'll know it came from me. He'll know it came from us. Edward moved closer. Amara, you tried to do this alone 3 years ago, and they crushed you. This time you're not alone. This time you have resources, connections, protection. Your criminal empire, you mean? His smile was thin. Sometimes it takes a devil to fight devils. The question is, are you willing to trust me? Amara thought about 3 years of hiding, 3 years of fear, 3 years of wondering if she'd ever feel safe again. Then she thought about Edward, the way he'd protected her, the way he'd held her last night, the way he'd looked at her like she was precious rather than problematic. I trust you, she said. Over the next 3 days, Amara learned what Edward Morelli's resources actually meant. Lawyers appeared, legitimate ones who specialized in international law and diplomatic cases. Private investigators compiled dossiers. Journalists were contacted through careful intermediaries. But most importantly, Edward had connections with federal agents who'd been trying to build cases against corrupt diplomats for years. Amara sat in a secure office and gave a detailed testimony, this time with immunity and protection guarantees. The documents you translated 3 years ago, Agent Chin said, reviewing her statement. Do you still have access to them? They were on a secure server. I don't, Amara stopped. Wait, I backed everything up to a private cloud storage before I ran. I was so scared I'd forget the details. Edward's hand found hers under the table. Can you access it? Maybe if the account still exists.
It did.
That evening, sitting at Edward's dining table with her laptop, Amara logged into a cloud storage account she'd created 3 years ago under a false name. And there it was. Every document she'd translated, every piece of evidence of Kareem Novak's crimes. This is it, Agent Chen breathed, scrolling through the files. This is everything we need, Miss Ahmed. Miss Sanchez, this is enough to bring charges, real ones. What about diplomatic immunity? Amara asked. These crimes are serious enough that his home country will waive it or face international consequences, especially once this hits the news. Agent Chen looked at her with something like awe. You did it. You actually did it. But Amara wasn't celebrating yet. Kareem will know I'm the source. He'll retaliate. He'll try, Edward said quietly. He won't succeed. That night, every major news outlet broke the story. Russian diplomat implicated in international arms trafficking scheme, evidence provided by whistleblower translator. Kareem Novak's face was everywhere. By morning, he'd been recalled to Russia and stripped of his diplomatic credentials. Amara stood at Edward's windows, watching the city wake up, and felt something she hadn't felt in years.
Safe.
Edward, arms wrapped around her from behind. How do you feel? Like I can breathe again? She leaned back against his chest. Like maybe I can stop running. You never have to run again. He kissed her temple. You're home now. Home. The words settled into her chest like a missing piece she hadn't known she needed. Not a place, a person. Edward had become her home without her quite realizing it. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. In the morning light, he looked softer, younger, more vulnerable than the dangerous man the world saw. What happens now? Now? His thumb traced her jaw. Now you decide what you want your life to look like. The UN has already reached out about reinstating you. Several translation agencies want to hire you. You could go back to that world if you wanted.
What do you want?
I want you here. His voice was rough with honesty. I want you in my life every day. I want to wake up to you in my bed. I want to keep you safe and make you happy and give you everything you've been denied, but only if that's what you want. Amara's heart swelled with an emotion so big it almost hurt. She'd spent 3 years alone by choice, convinced that closeness meant danger. But Edward had shown her that the right person didn't make you vulnerable. They made you stronger. I want that too, she whispered. I want you. His kiss was gentle this time, almost reverent. Then you have me, all of me, for as long as you'll keep me. That might be a very long time.
Good.
Edward smiled against her lips. Because I'm not letting you go. Safety isn't just the absence of danger. It's the presence of someone willing to stand between you and the world. Amara had found that in Edward, and he'd found something equally precious in her, someone who saw past the criminal to the man underneath. But as they built a life together, Amara would discover that loving Edward Morelli meant entering a world with its own dangers, its own rules. The question was she brave enough to claim the happiness she deserved? 6 months later, Amara stood in the penthouse that had become her home, preparing for an event that terrified her more than Kareem Novak ever had, meeting Edward's family. They're going to hate me, she said for the 10th time, adjusting the deep blue dress Edward had insisted on buying her. It hugged her curves perfectly, the color making her brown skin glow. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo, small diamond earrings, a gift from Edward, catching the light. Edward appeared behind her in the mirror, devastating in a tailored charcoal suit. His hands settled on her waist. They're going to love you. My sister Gloria already stalks your Instagram. That's not reassuring. Amara turned to face him. Edward, I'm the woman who took their boss away from his duties, who doesn't understand your world, who makes me happy. He kissed her forehead. That's all that matters to them. You make me happy, Amara. They'll see that in about 30 seconds. The dinner was held at an upscale Italian restaurant, one of the Morelli family's legitimate businesses. When Amara walked in on Edward's arm, The room fell silent. 10 pairs of eyes assessed her, and she felt every inch the outsider she was. Then a woman with Edward's gray eyes and a warm smile stood up. Amara, finally, Gloria crossed to her, pulling her into a hug before Edward could introduce them. I'm Gloria, the favorite sister. These are my brothers, Marco and Dante, my cousins Sophia and Luca, and about a dozen others you'll forget immediately. The ice broke. Over the course of the evening, Amara found herself swept into the warmth of the Morelli family. They asked about her work. She'd taken a position with a private translation firm, doing legitimate contract work, and her life. They teased Edward mercilessly about being whipped, about smiling more, about actually taking days off. He's different with you, Gloria confided later when the men were arguing about sports. Lighter, like he can breathe again. He did the same for me, Amara admitted. Gave me back my life. Then welcome to the family. Gloria squeezed her hand. Because, trust me, he's not letting you go. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Amara found Edward on the balcony overlooking the city. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For sharing them with me, your family, your life, for making me feel like I belong. Edward turned in her arms, his hands cupping her face. You do belong here with me. He paused, then reached into his pocket, which is why I have something to ask you. Amara's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and unique. Amara Sanchez. Amara Ahmed. Whatever name you choose, whoever you want to be, I want to be there for it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to protect you and cherish you and argue with you about stupid things and make you laugh until you can't breathe. His voice went rough with emotion. Marry me, please. Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks. 6 months ago, she'd been alone, terrified, convinced she'd never be safe again. Now she stood in the arms of a man who'd moved heaven and earth to protect her, who'd given her back her name and her voice, who looked at her like she hung the stars. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, yes. Edward slipped the ring on her finger, then kissed her with a passion that promised forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Amara realized something profound. She'd spent 3 years learning to survive alone. Now she was learning something infinitely better. How to live with someone who loved her completely. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you so much. I love you, too. Edward's smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious face. My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife-to-be wife. The word filled her with joy instead of fear, because with Edward, Amara had learned that love wasn't about losing yourself. It was about finding someone who helped you become more fully yourself than you'd ever been alone. They stood on the balcony as the city lights sparkled below, wrapped in each other's arms, no longer running from the past or fearing the future, just living, loving, and choosing each other over and over again. The courtroom was packed with journalists, diplomats, and law enforcement. Amara sat in the witness stand, poised and professional, in a navy suit, her wedding ring catching the light as she gestured. Edward sat in the gallery, his presence a steady anchor. This was the final trial, not Karim Novak's, who'd already been sentenced in Russia, but the case against his American co-conspirators. Amara's testimony was the linchpin, and she delivered it with the confidence of a woman who'd reclaimed her voice. And you're certain about the contents of these documents? The prosecutor asked. Absolutely certain, Amara said clearly. I translated them myself. They detail systematic corruption and illegal arms trading spanning 5 years. When she stepped down 2 hours later, Edward was waiting. He pulled her into his arms and she breathed him in, grounding herself. Proud of you, he murmured against her hair. Couldn't have done it without you. Sure you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, and Amara paused on the steps, looking up at the sky. She thought about the woman she'd been, scared, alone, hiding from her own shadow. She barely recognized that person now, Amara Morelli. She'd taken Edward's name. Reclaiming the parts of her identity she'd hidden while building something new was no longer running. She was standing her ground, speaking her truth, living her life. That night, in the penthouse that was truly home now, she curled up against Edward's side on the couch. He was reading emails, one hand absently playing with her curls. Edward,
Thank you for seeing me.
for really seeing me even when I was trying to be invisible. He set aside his phone, pulling her fully into his lap. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with all of you, the parts you show the world, and the parts you hide. For choosing me every day. Always, Amara promised, I'll always choose you. And in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York, who'd proven to be the safest place she'd ever known, Amara Morelli smiled. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't running away from danger. It's running toward love. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is important for me to continue creating content.